to be part of this wonderful event and to be in the company of people who work so hard to make a difference in the life or lives of other people. Whether you are a professional caregiver or a family caregiver, you're making a difference. So thank you. Thank you very much. So the title of this is Caregiving a Time of Grace. And Mitch, you'll have to forgive me. I'm going to be moving around a lot, so I hope that doesn't cause problems for you.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So I just, again, Janelle and Mike, thank you so much for the invitation. I've said to them, you know, you could always ask someone else, and your willingness to even bring me back means more to me than you know. So I'm incredibly grateful. For someone who is a family caregiver, and we were visiting, Mr. Dietrich, we were visiting before, and that idea of just constantly giving of yourself and the challenge of that. So thank you. Because what we'll talk about is if you didn't do it, who's going to do it? And I think that's where we're going to see some opportunities in the future. And then again, professional caregivers. You know, I think COVID put us in a different place in terms of how many people would be willing to stick around and how many people said, I am done with this. So for your willingness to continue in that role, beyond grateful. It says so much about your character and your integrity, right? Your willingness to give. So I'm very grateful. Now this is my friend Sarah Rowan, and Sarah lives in Aiken, South Carolina. Sarah was the caregiver to her husband who had Alzheimer's disease. He was a college professor out of Ohio, and he had Alzheimer's disease. And they moved from Ohio down to South Carolina to be closer to family. And Sarah had this wonderful phrase that I've told her that I'm going to continue to use in my presentations, and that is this concept of holy people doing holy work. Now, people might say, well, now you're bringing in religion. Not at all. Holy, when you think about the word holy, holy is about being fully present for someone. Holy is about seeing the sacredness of what it is that you've been called to do. Because to be a caregiver is a sacred activity. It's a sacred process. It is a sacred journey. And in the midst of the muck and the frustrations and all the things that go into being a caregiver, there's also this sacredness. And that's holy people doing holy work. Caregivers are holy people doing holy work of giving of themselves. So that's my shout out to my dear friends. Anyone who's a caregiver, it is not for the faint of heart. And I've often found great amusement in the idea of the fainting goat who just will drop at a moment's notice. There are some people that are hardwired to be caregivers. And there are some people, and you know them in your own lives, they can't do it, right? And that's where I think is the difference, is some people can, some people can't. For those people that can, they may still faint, but they eventually get up. Because again, it's not for the faint of heart. But I like this picture, and this analogy has been used by people a lot smarter than I could ever hope to be, of this idea of when you get on a plane, you know, you're instructed by the flight attendants, you need to put the mask on yourself before you take care of anybody else. But a caregiver is also hardwired sometimes to just naturally, let me take care of everybody first, and then I'll take care of myself. But the problem, and I love what you talked about in terms of this day and exercise and all the things that come into play. If I'm not taking care of myself, then what's going to happen is the cumulative effects of all the challenges, all the insults, and not in the literal sense, but in the figurative sense, the challenges that keep hitting me, that has an additive effect, and it wears me down. And it wears me down to the point, some of you know this, that are professional caregivers, where you've seen a caregiver who's no longer able to do that work anymore because they're so exhausted. And so if we're going to be caregivers, we have to remember to take care of ourselves first. We have to put the masks on our faces first before we can take care of other people. And in the big scheme of things, from a time standpoint, it's not that much time. You're not adding that much time to your day when you take care of yourself first. If you don't take care of yourself first, now you've really added to the time factor. So just some quick numbers, and I suspect many of you already know this. 1 in 5 Americans is a caregiver to an adult or a child. 53 million caregivers today. This is 2020 data. That's an increase since 2015, so an 18% increase of people providing support to multiple people, but also an increase of 9.5 million caregivers since 2015. So with it, and it makes sense when we think about it, with an aging population, as we're seeing more people that are advancing to 80, 85, 90, and when am I most likely going to need help? When I'm in those upper years or advanced years, the need for caregivers is also going to grow. So as our population ages, caregiving, the numbers of people serving will also increase. I think this is interesting, and I touched on it, but maybe in a slightly skewed way. Because of the growth in the numbers of people needing a caregiver, we're also seeing that the availability of those people that can serve in that role, not only, this has grown, but this is shrinking. So not only am I maybe caring for my mom or my dad, but I'm also caring for my mother-in-law or my father-in-law, or I'm also caring for, and with blended families, I'm not just caring for my mother, but I might also be caring for my stepmother or my stepmother. I don't know if that's a thing, but I'm going to add that. So there's a lot of people that are going to require my help, and with smaller families, so there might only be 1 or 2 children in a family. Okay, now more responsibility is on me. The caregiver support ratio is something that Feinberg and Levine talked about in 2015-2016, and this idea of how many caregivers do you possibly have, and this is more predictive than anything, but how many caregivers do you possibly have for every person 80 years of age and older? And in 2010, 7 caregivers for every person 80 and older. By the way, when I grew up, it was not unusual to be in school with people that had large families. So 7, 8, 9, 10 kids, that doesn't surprise us when we see these numbers. By 2030, the thought is there would be 4 caregivers for every person 80 and older, and by 2050, 3 caregivers. So that's what they were predicting back in 2015. Now the caregiver support ratio is really about the number of available caregivers, 45, what we say is 45 to 64, for each person 80 years of age and older. So that's how that ratio happens. So it's the number of potential caregivers divided by the number of persons 80 plus that are at risk for assistance. By the way, this is free, this is extra to you. Did you know that 90% of our healthcare costs are for treating chronic conditions and mental health conditions? 90% of our healthcare costs. So this idea, Bevan, you can appreciate this idea of people not only aging but having multiple chronic conditions also comes into play. So this number, the 80 plus, continues to grow of those people needing assistance. Now I worked with Dr. Josie Schaefer, who's in the Center for Public Affairs Research, and I asked the question of her, what do you think for Nebraska? What do you think that caregiver support ratio would be? And so what we did is we looked at the numbers of people that are 80 and older, and we looked at the numbers of people that could be a caregiver. Now, with caregiving, and there's both men and women in this room, but you can see more women than men. So when we think about the caregiver support ratio, we tend to look at how many females and males, but recognizing there's probably more females than males serving in that role. So that's how we're getting to this number. And so 5.7 caregivers for every 1 older adult. But if you look at national data, 61% of caregivers are females and 29% of caregivers are male. And this is not hard facts as much as it's here's how we come to this number. We could we could guesstimate 2.9 caregivers for every one older adult in the state of Nebraska. There are 2.9 caregivers. If you take these numbers and back into it this way, we have 2.9 caregivers for every one older adult. Now that's powerful because we go back. They were predicting in 2015 there would be 3 caregivers for every person 80 and older. This is 2022, right? This is just a quick check. This is 2022. We're just about there in Nebraska. So the need for professional caregivers becomes even more apparent. The need for the Eastern Nebraska Office on Aging becomes even more apparent because we've got this shift in terms of who's even available. So who's receiving care and who provides the type of care? Most caregivers support a relative. If I were to ask you, for those of you that are caregivers, are you caring for a family member or are you caring for a friend? Or is it both? How many of you family member? Okay. How many of you a friend? Okay, so the majority of you are caring for a family member, which is reflected here. When we think about who's being cared for, it's a parent or an in-law, spouse or partner, the majority being parent, and then it falls in line in terms of other people that are being supported. 40% of caregivers live with a family member. Now, the value is having that person physically present can be a great benefit so that support is provided directly. But it also means if I'm living with someone, so 40% of that care, and I'm there 24/7, I also have to start thinking about things such as Marianne alluded to, things like respite. Where can I get a break? Where can I get a little time away? And time away doesn't have to be for days, weeks, and months. Time away can be a 10-minute walk around the block. But where can I start thinking about respite and relief? It's interesting that when we think about the kinds of care that caregivers are offering, it's much different today than maybe it was when Steve Zaret, and I'll talk about him in a second, but when Dr. Zaret out of Penn State was talking about caregiving, much different, more complex. Complex in terms of not only physical health issues, but emotional and mental health issues, memory issues. And while we know that, particularly from the Alzheimer's Association and supporting people with dementia, we've had people with dementia for decades. That's not news. But what is news are the sheer number of people with dementia. That we've moved to dementia being, if you take out COVID, the 6th leading cause of death. So the numbers of people with dementia are growing. And then in terms of caregivers providing support, so 24 hours a week, that shakes out to about 3 and some change hours a day that people are providing. Now that's on the low end. On the high end, it's going to be much greater, particularly if I'm in the home. So this is an infographic that was put together by AARP along with the National Alliance for Caregiving, just showing you the increase in numbers. So from 2015, 43.5 million caregivers, and then 2020, 53 million. And then in terms of the percentage, 18 to 21%. I think the other thing is more people are providing care. We've already talked about this. More people providing care for more than just one person because of the lack of availability. And then it's also interesting that in 2015, 19% of caregivers said they had difficulties providing that care, and that has increased to 26%. And that difficulty in terms of how do I support someone who might have emotional issues or mental health issues? How do I support someone in the throes of a pandemic? How do I ensure that they have the care and the support they need? And then you just see the natural breakdown of men being caregivers and women, and then the financial impact. 45% having had at least one financial impact. what we do know, what the research tells us, is that people will find themselves having to leave the workforce in order to provide care and support. Which on the one hand, isn't that wonderful that someone has a loved one caring for them in the home, on the one hand. On the other hand, when that person leaves the workforce, not only are they leaving an income, a steady income, but they're also leaving retirement savings. They're also leaving, and you know what I'm saying now, they're also leaving the opportunity for themselves to plan for their own aging experience. We tend to kind of look at things in isolation, but we have to think bigger picture. To quote Dr. Osborne, 3 plays down the field, we have to think about long term, what does it mean when that caregiver leaves the workforce, and how will that impact them down the road? So life through the rearview mirror. By the way, sometimes our lives are so complicated that it's probably safer to look through the rearview mirror than it is to look through the windshield, because it kind of all hits you at once. You don't want to drive, though, watching the rearview mirror. That could be dangerous unless you're backing up, right? And sometimes it's safer to want to back up, because I remember what life was like then, but here's my opportunity. Steve Zarek and others wrote about this idea, and this was in the 1980s, this idea of this new caregiver, and talking about caregiving in the gerontological literature. And with that, writing about this concept of caregiver burden. How many of you have heard of caregiver burden? We all have, because that's been what's been in the mainstream newspapers and the literature, this idea that to be a caregiver is a burden. So you get that set in your head. You think, gosh, this, or even signing up for it, you start to think, do I want to do this because I hear it's a burden? And this all comes out of the work of Steven Zarek. But what's interesting is that there's been a movement away from talking about caregiving solely as a burden. And by the way, it's a challenge. Anybody who's done it, I'm not dismissing that, because it is one of those life-changing experiences. And Marianne, it's when you talked about being a caregiver to your parents, it's one of those life-changing experiences that you are, even though you've worked in aging and served on the governing board forever, for those of you here who work in the field of aging, and you think you know what to do. I thought I knew what to do. I'm a gerontologist, for heaven's sakes. But when it smacks you right in the face, you think, I had no idea. You can read all day about things, but until it hits you, you have no idea. Right? And you mentioned that too. You have no idea. But the thing about caregiving is this question, and this is where coming to a program like this and the 5 steps, it's about building armor. It's about building this strength and this support. And that's why, Janelle, what you've done with this program makes so much sense, because it helps to pull things into a different perspective. And what it's saying is that caregiving may not be, on the one hand, there is some burden, but on the other hand, there's some things to derive from it. There are people who see caregiving solely as stressful and burdensome and are looking for a way for it to end because it's that overwhelming. But there are others who talk about, yes, it's stressful, yes, it's a challenge, but there's also gains from the caregiving experience through the grace moments. Gains through the grace moments. And so researchers have moved away from the initial work of Steven Zarek talking about caregiving as a burden to now caregiver appraisal. And what caregiver appraisal means is, let's talk about not only the negatives, let's also talk about the positives. Because when we start hearing about the positives, now we start to see the balance. Maybe it's a little imbalanced depending on the situation. We start seeing a little balance that can be supportive to us. So caregiving is a time of grace for caring for another. So there are researchers who have picked up on this idea of the positive aspects of caregiving, the positive sides of it. And PAC, or positive aspect of caregiving, is the gains or satisfaction feelings resulting from the caregiving experience. Now, I'm not naive enough to suggest to you that there aren't some times that being a caregiver can be traumatic, right? You hear people use the expression PTSD, post-traumatic stress. Well, I think sometimes caregiving can bring about stress. It can be so traumatic. It can be very hard for people to find a sense of healing. So that's where being able to find other ways to redirect our energies and our emotions, meaning what are the goods that are coming out of here each day, once a day, what's the good thing that comes out, can be supportive to us. Bringing family members together, or sometimes family members separate, but maybe that was meant to be. Maybe it's about the companionship and a more meaningful life. And then also the researchers talk about, this is from the Journal of Geriatric Dementia, spiritual and moral remuneration. Say that a few times. Remuneration. But this idea that you did for me, I did for you. So I want to take a little minute, and I want to be mindful of time too, but I want to get your thoughts, because that's why we're here today. It's about you. So can you tell me what have been some positive benefits that you've experienced in terms of your caregiving journey?
Extra time with that family member.
Extra time with the family member? Thank you.
Knowing you've made a difference.
Knowing you've made a difference. How does that look? When you say knowing you've made a difference?
Just knowing that you've touched someone's life or their family's life and gave them a little bit of time to just kind of breathe and just have the opportunity to know that me providing 5 hours worth of respite for you, you can go and get your hair done, your nails done, and just relax a little bit. It is beneficial to me. I can just speak for myself, knowing that I've made a difference in somebody's life that day. Whether it's for 5 minutes or 5 hours, I've given them a little breather to get through their day. And we're honest at times, we all need that. Just to do nothing. Just to sit in peace and quiet and not have to worry about are they going to touch something, are they going to touch something. So just knowing that I've made a difference for just one day, for 5 hours.
Just one day. But maybe, again, what you've said in terms of making that difference, whether, and how you characterize that, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours, but allowing that person that relief, and how important that is, how vitally important that is.
I think of, my kids are adults now, but when my kids were little, you know, when you come home from school, they want to bombard you. I said, just give me 30 minutes. Unless you're dying, don't call my name, kind of thing.
And even then, I might want to give some thought to that.
Yeah. Like, nobody's bleeding, don't call my name. And I literally would go home after working all day and just lay across the bed. Just kind of say, just to breathe, you know, in peace. And then it's like, okay, back up. Have to be mommy. Daddy's not home from work yet, you know, doing all the things that you do to complete that day. Just, that was my just 30 minutes of just, whew, exhaling.
Exhaling, give me time to decompress.
Yeah.
And to shift, S-H-I-F-T, to shift gears into this other role that I take on. Thank you. Anybody else?
I took care of my mom before she passed with Alzheimer's. I have a lot of funny memories. You know, now I was just sitting there thinking about all the funny things we kind of did. You know, so that was like a positive for me that I took care of her.
And when you can see the humor in something, and even at the time it just might be one of those things that can push you over the edge, but when you see the humor in it, it lightens. And you know, when we can laugh, and By the way, I need to have you join me whenever I go out and give a presentation, because you have the whole room in stitches, right? If you're not bleeding, don't call. And if you're not dying, don't call. Because when you can laugh, right, that brings joy. Thank you.
Ma'am, oh, I was going to say, it's slowed me down. I'm a very fast person, said yes to everything, and now I'm caregiving, and I have an excuse. Oh, I can't come. I never could say no. And it's making me see what's really important in my life and taking more time for the person I'm caring for. It just, yeah, it's slowing down. That's wonderful.
It's wonderful. And it's being fully present, isn't it? When you can be fully present, the attention, paying attention to that person, 100%. I wonder what has surprised you in terms of your caregiving? What has surprised you?
I've done both. I work professionally in caregiving, and I've had to be a family caregiver for my grandmother before she passed away. And I have the utmost respect for 24/7 caregivers. As a professional, I can clock out and go home. I could not with my grandma. And so it's very humbling. And that's the difference, right, between professional and family. You don't get to clock out and go home. And you have to be present and be there all the time, 24/7, potentially. So that was, I thought because I did it for work and I've done it for a long time, oh, it's going to be a piece of cake.
It is night and day, isn't it, sister? Holy smoke. What was I thinking? The idea of clocking out. But isn't that what, if I can have 30 minutes, I can clock out for a minute to be able to come back in. But there's also this idea of, I've got to be, I signed up to do this for my grandmother or for my dad or my mom, so I've got to be fully, and not recognizing that need to recharge. Anything else in terms of what surprised you?
I'm going to elaborate on her doing that, because I was a CNA and then took care of my mom. I had to learn to detach, because all of a sudden you're giving a person like your mother a shower or taking her to the bathroom. So you have to learn to kind of detach in those little moments and take care of your person, because it's very different than like what you're saying. It's like, I thought I got this. I was like, and it's not. It's not the same as being like in a nursing home or something. It's somebody, mother, they birthed me, raised me, and here I was. It's very different. So that kind of surprised me a lot.
Goes back to that, being the holy people doing holy work, especially when it's a family member, and being with them in very intimate sort of moments that.
I think that I can piggyback on that because it surprised me really that I even did it, to be honest with you. And at the time, my parents, I was still taking care of my husband who had cancer as well. So, you're giving showers to your daddy and, wiping the bottom of your mama and showering your husband. And it's like, at the end, although you're stressed because it's like, oh my gosh, it's like, I did it, and you did it. It just surprised me that I did it, basically. Again, knowing what other caregivers did, that I myself was able to do it.
Generosity grows out of love, doesn't it? And that, as you say, that when you were surprised, the courage. The word courage, cur is Old French for heart, right? Courage, it takes courage to be a caregiver. So there are a number, what the literature has demonstrated, a number of positive aspects of caregiving, and Lloyd and others did a critical review of qualitative literature as it related to caregiving, from role satisfaction, emotional rewards, personal growth, competence and mastery, faith and spiritual growth, relationship gains, a sense of duty, and the idea of reciprocity. My mother birthed me, I need to in return. And then the caregiver perceptions of the process of the positive caregiving. Acceptance. To reach that point of acceptance, though, is if that's not maybe something that happens like a light switch, it's a journey. Accept, okay, this is my role, and I'll talk about that in a second. Choosing the attitude. Attitude makes a difference, doesn't it? But if I am so tired and I'm worn out and I'm drained, it's hard for me to have a positive attitude. And that's where finding respite and support, being able to connect with these amazing professionals can help me with that positive attitude. But if I'm so spent, if I'm so worn out, if I am grieving over the loss of a parent who is dying and my surviving parent, and the one that died was the caregiver of my surviving parent, who I had no idea had all these problems, that can be exhausting. And the thing when I heard 24/7, the thing about a caregiver is it's being on high alert 24/7. I know somebody's watching them, and I've got to have the trust to know that they'll do the job that needs to be done. It may not be the way I do it, and that I'm guilty as charged because I expect it this way, but maybe that doesn't have to be that way. Commitment to the relationship, a relationship that may or may not have been positive over the life course, we know that. Creating opportunities for other people to be supportive, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then drawing strength from faith, past relationships, and others. But being open and hearing other people say, you know what, you are doing a good job. You are making a difference. And sometimes, oh, no, because, well, no, you are doing a good job and being able to accept that. I miss her greatly, and I'm so appreciative to have had the opportunity to meet her, have her come to my death and dying classes. This was Leland Knox Shanks, and Mrs. Shanks cared for her husband who had Alzheimer's disease. She wrote the book, Your Name is Hughes Hannibal Shanks, and it's a book that I refer to, even though it's a couple of decades old, I refer caregivers to, because she talked about this transformative journey that she had to be on in moving from, I'm this person's wife, Hughes, her husband, I'm this person's wife, to now I'm his caregiver. Because during the process of his development of Alzheimer's disease, one day they were in their home, and he one day said to her, do your parents know you're here? And it was at that point, like a light switch, where she said, he doesn't get who I am anymore. And she made the decision, I've got to be his caregiver. That's a transformation. It's a change. Now there's grieving that goes on with that, because I'm not his wife anymore, because he doesn't see me that way. Now there might be glimpses and moments that occurs or bubbles up, but not all the time, and recognizing that. So caregiving is about being human, and it's a natural process. And we live in an interesting time where things get redefined and reformulated and fill in the blank. But caregiving is something that we've done throughout our whole lives, throughout history, in terms of caregiving. Moms with kids, there's caregiving there. Caring for older family members, that's always been happening, but maybe not with the intensity that it is today, because you have other obligations that come into play. But Kleinman says, consider how central caregiving is to what it means to be human. Caregiving is an indelible part of relations between partners, the raising of children, and response to the infirmities of aged parents and grandparents. Caregiving is natural. The unfortunate part is that the conditions and diseases have changed so much that what seemed natural before may not be so natural today. Nancy Cobb, this is another book that I think is powerful. She wrote this as an outgrowth of caring for both of her parents who had Alzheimer's disease. And I think about her and I think about the hand she's been dealt genetically, both of her parents having Alzheimer's disease. And she said, in a way, your mother was your first love affair. You knew her heartbeat, her voice, her moods, her emotions. Her eyes were the first you saw coming into this world, just as yours will be the last she sees going out of it. You are giving birth to her and to yourself as you grow to the next stage of your life. Nancy Cow was in a place where, as her mother's dementia got worse, this question of how do we support her? How do we help sustain her and help her to thrive? And instead of recoiling, she leaned into it in terms of the support, because she recognized, here's someone who helped me start out in the world. So what it means to care as a grace moment, to care is to be human, to be a caregiver means to allow those for whom we care to unveil our own illusions of immortality and claim a much wider and richer understanding of life. To unveil our own illusions of immortality. Once you take on that moniker of being a caregiver, your identity changes. But it also changes how you look at the world. And I think when you said, I can say no to people now, that's one of those nice gifts, isn't it? So outcomes of grace, forgiveness. Now, and I can remember even with my own dad, and it wasn't until toward the end of his life that he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and so I didn't live the length of time most caregivers do. So I remember somebody saying to me, well, you haven't been a caregiver long enough to really get it, which I thought was an well, and I get that, I understand, and I thought, okay, that's fair. But it was one of those things that was very compressed, and it happened all at once as opposed to over a period of time. And it's one of those things where some of the times when some of the things he would say could be so hurtful, right? And hurtful because it was coming out of a place, it finally dawned on me a number of years later, the words that he used were coming out of a place of his own fear. Because sometimes we think about, how could you possibly say that to me? But then I needed to say in my own mind, it's got to be hard being you right now. For someone that's always been in control, somebody that's always made decisions, somebody who's always called the shots. You can't call the shots anymore. And so those words coming from that place. And so learning to forgive. By the way, that's not something that happens right away. That takes time. In a warm room. Help and strength from others and ourselves, right? The outcomes of grace. And we can see that it helps us to engage other people. And we'll talk about that, when you say no once and then people don't show up, it's coming at it from a different strategy, so I'm going to offer that to you. And then time, realizing every day is a gift. We're very linear people, so we're very birth to death. And so what we sometimes forget is there is going to be that time when that person isn't there. What questions do I need to be asking them now that wouldn't dawn on me because I'm linear? I'm just going to every day. But what are some things maybe that I need to ask of them so that I have some things that will provide comfort to them? And then humility. Some of us need humility. Some of us need a lot of humility. And it's this idea of humility is about saying it's okay to reach out and ask for help. The fact that you're all here would suggest you are high on the charts of humility, because you are here to see where can I get resources, where can I get information. Because to ask for help, and I was visiting with a lady earlier this week whose husband just died suddenly. And she said, it is so hard for me to ask for help. And I have to let some of that down. I have to let my hair down and say, it's okay to ask for help. This box I found along this, when all this was happening with my dad, you never know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have. Sometimes you've got to, and I'll use Leela Shanks, you got to put on your big girl pants or your big boy pants, you got to kick it in. You don't want to do it, it's going to be done. So, Henry James, we help each other even unconsciously, even in our own effort. We lighten the efforts of others. Sorrow comes in great waves, but it rolls over us. And though it may almost smother us, it leaves us on the spot. And we know that if it is strong, we are stronger inasmuch as it passes and we remain. You know, sometimes everything happens at once. I don't know about you. Do you ever notice that? You're going along, life's pretty good. And then one thing happens, and then another thing happens, and it's just like, holy smokes, you couldn't have spread that out? But that's life. So good comfort from Jerry Sittster requires empathy, forces adjustments, and sometimes mandates huge sacrifices. Comforters must be prepared to let the pain of another become their own and let it transform them, and they'll never be the same. And not meaning that you take that on yourself entirely, but as much as being able to acknowledge and recognize it. Because again, I go back to my dad. It was hard being him when things really got bad. It was hard to be him. So finding support in your caregiving role, this I thought was an interesting comment from a gentleman who's a wife to, or excuse me, who's a caregiver to his wife who had Alzheimer's disease. He said, if you cultivate and expect joy, you'll see the little things you might otherwise have taken for granted. We all got up this morning expecting there to be, if not sun, clouds. We expected it. We didn't expect to wake up with no light. Because it's there. We expect air. We expect all those things. I know those are somewhat mundane examples, but we expect it. But when we stop and say, wait a minute, there are birds singing. When we stop and say, gosh, the sun is shining, it can make a difference. His comment was the disease is not an all or none phenomenon. And sometimes when you get that diagnosis, and I made that mistake with my dad, well, now that he has this, everything's changed. Not necessarily, because the person, their response to the disease ebbs and flows as well. There is on the Family Caregiver Alliance website 5 tips, how about that 5 number? 5 tips for accessing community resources, of arranging care for an elder or ailing family member. It's time consuming. So being able to draw on the people that are here and learning about their resources now can be of great benefit later on. But I have to do my research first. So I teach deaf and dying. That's who I am. That's what I think about, whether that's good or bad. And I have the students create a deaf plan. And it is everything from soup to nuts. And somebody will say, well, that seems so morbid. Oh, whatever. It's not morbid. What it is it makes you a smart consumer. To be a caregiver, a gerontologist who was not a smart consumer went into it when things kind of unfurled. And so when you can get that information, you add to your toolbox. You add to the information that can be helpful to you. Planning ahead, sometimes you have to take it day by day. Sometimes also planning ahead can be useful. What made Dr. Osborne, Tom Osborne, a genius coach, is he always thought 3 plays down the field. He was, okay, we've got this touchdown, great. He was thinking about the 3 plays down. He was thinking about the end of the game. He was past this. That was yesterday's news. Now he's down here. Well, thinking about from a caregiving standpoint, how can I plan ahead in terms of, or at least am I familiar with some opportunities? Do I know the phone number to the Eastern Nebraska Office on Aging? Do I know the phone number to this wonderful community that I drive by that offers memory care? So when I need to make a call, I can do so. Documenting everything. It's when you go to the doctor, what was the conversation? When you make arrangements for services, what was the conversation? And it's sometimes buying a 75-cent spiral notebook that you can get at a place that begins with a W. Then Walgreens, there you go. Or,
I knew that's what you was thinking.
yeah. There you go. We'll go with that. But just, and having a notebook, and on the one hand, so you can document everything. On the other hand, so you can go back and see all the progress you've made. Sometimes if you don't see it in writing, did it happen? So we talked about being prepared, and just knowing who is the physician, who's my contact person. By the way, when you want to go to see the doctor, who's your best friend? Not the doctor, it's the nurse, or it's the person at the front desk that can get you in. I say that to people that are nurses. You know how that works. And being strategic, being assertive about what you need, and then not hesitating to ask for help. How many of you are saying, Julie, that's more than 5? It is. But don't hesitate asking for help. In fact, agencies like it when you ask for help because that's why they exist, for that purpose. So finding support through resilience, this is from the Sudden Caregiver. We've kind of touched on some of these as it related to the Family Caregiver Alliance, but keeping a binder of important finds, sometimes information on schedules, what works, what doesn't work, reviewing your social support, who can support you. The thing about caregiving is the people that you thought would be there aren't there, but the people you didn't think in a million years would be there are. Who are your peeps, so to speak? Who are the people that support you? A gratitude journal. What one good thing happened today? I had 5 minutes where that same question was not asked over and over again. 5 minutes. That was a good thing that happened. Healthy lifestyles, getting exercise, going for a walk. Exercise, 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 exercise is the magic bullet. If I were to say to you, how can people age well? It's exercise. Physical exercise, cognitive, all those things. Mini breaks, and think about a mini break. We want to, okay, this break's going to be a half hour, an hour. Maybe you can shorten it down. Self-determination, your instincts, your gut knows. You might say, no, it doesn't. Yes, it does. And requesting help, it's okay to ask. Some other things, and I realize I'm a little over, but I'm going to kick it up, so pardon me. Making a list of what you can do and can't do. You can manage the house. You can call a plumber. You can advocate for your loved one. By the way, a caregiver, you're amazed at the voice that comes out of you. When you're sitting in an emergency room and this resident comes in and looks at your loved one as if there's some old man from the nursing home, and you say, wait a minute, this isn't some old man from the nursing home, this is my dad. I need you to take care of him. It's amazing the voice that will come out. But I can't clean out the gutters. I'm afraid to get up on the ladder. I can't use a heavy mower. Do we even have DVRs? I can't program DVRs. But if somebody comes along and says, if you ever need help, you let me know. You have your list ready to go. Thank you for offering. Do you know how to program a DVR? No. Do you know someone who knows how to program a DVR? That's what I mean. So that you thought ahead, and then people want to help. I truly believe that. People, they want to help, they want to be supportive. Give them that chance. I love this from Tifa Snell. We have to let go of what's gone and then celebrate or appreciate what is possible. That means I have to let go of what was in the rearview mirror and what the person used to know to what's in my windshield now. There are websites, 7 tips for handling caregiving challenges, caregiver support, which is also available. There is this wonderful place, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful place called the Eastern Nebraska Office on Aging. Don't you just feel the love? And these beautiful souls here, and if you can get to their website, if you're not accessing information in that way. There's literature here that's available to you. Pick it up. You may say, I don't need that today. Probably not. You may need it tomorrow. So having some information, that's part of your toolbox, and put it in that spiral notebook that you bought at the W place, and just have that on hand.
Hey, Julie,
Please.
since you have this up, if you know of caregivers that weren't able to make it today, we are recording your session and the other sessions from today. We also have sessions from previous caregiver events. Right under that resource tab, when you hit the resource tab, you'll see those. And so those are videos that caregivers can watch at their leisure. If they've only got 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we've got some good exercise tips and stuff for them as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You know, and I like the fact in terms of the exercise and just something I can do. I don't know where I would begin. How do I do that? That information is there. Thank you. Thanks to you. So to leave you with this, and I have taken up this approach in my mind. If I'm going to be on LinkedIn, I'm going to use it to my benefit, right? And I see your posts and things, Marianne. Surround yourself with people who illuminate your path, who push you to dig deeper, who make you happy, who make you laugh, right? Who pray for you and support you even in the hard times. Those are your people. Isn't that lovely? Be around people that make you laugh. And don't turn on the news, because that's not going to make you laugh. Watch an old, you talked about Lucille Ball earlier. Watch an old I Love Lucy, or the Golden Girls. I worked through my grief watching just, what's the expression the kids say?
Binge watch.
Thank you, binge watch, right? And watching program after program after program. And you can stop it to go to the restroom, and then you come back, you pick up on, and it's just being able to laugh. Have a laugh. Have a good laugh. Not have a drink, not have a whatever. Have a laugh. So thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thanks to everybody who serves as a caregiver or serves in a supportive way. You're beautiful souls. Remember, you are holy people doing holy work. So thank you very much. Thank you.